welcome to our accounting learners. Yes, you with Ashraf Patel, and today we're looking at something very interesting. Remember, you always complain that you have difficulty with this adjustment. So don't fear when Ashraf is near, because we're going to make it easy for you, aren't we? Okay, let's look at this here now. We are looking at depreciation. Now, firstly, let us identify the two accounts involved. Whenever you are dealing with depreciation, your two accounts are depreciation, which you're going to debit, reason because it's an expense, and imputed expense. By that we mean it's an expense that does not affect the flow of funds. Something very important which you will use later on. You will then credit accumulated depreciation. Now, what type of an account is that? Accumulated depreciation is what we refer to as a negative asset. That's right, that part of the asset that has been utilized already. Let's carry on and see what's the next thing we're going to do. Now remember, there are certain methods of depreciation. In other words, different ways in which you can calculate your depreciation. And the first one that we will look at is called the fixed installment method. What do we mean by this here? By this here we mean that we will have to work on what is also known as the straight line method. And finally, it is also called the cost price. So, if you take this now into consideration, that if the question says, calculate depreciation on the fixed installment method, or on the straight line method, or on cost, in all three cases, in all three scenarios, you have to work with the cost price. That's right, you have to work with the cost price, and that's the most important part of this method of depreciation. Let us take an example. If you look at your example and you are given a cost of 100,000 Rand. Secondly, you work with amount, rate and time. Yes, ART. What do we mean by this here? Does this mean that you are expected to draw your accounting teacher? Certainly not. What it definitely means is that when you are doing this permutation, when you are doing this calculation, you have to take into account that you have to work with the amount, the rate and the time. Got that? So all three components are critical when it comes to your calculation. So here goes. The amount is 100,000 times your percentage, which is 10 over 100, times your time, which is 12 over 12. Now please, don't accept that this will always be 12 over 12. Why? Because depending on the time that the asset has been utilized, in other words, pro rata depreciation, take that into account when you are doing this calculation. Is that clear? I hope this is crystal clear to you. Obviously, your amount will be 10,000 Rand. Now, you are going to use a calculator to do this calculation. In other words, take your calculator, 100,000 times 10% times 12 divide by 12. In this way, you're going to come to an answer of 10,000 Rand. That is your depreciation for the period under review. The second method of depreciation is where you use what is called the diminishing balance method, sometimes referred to as the reducing balance method. And what is critical here is that you are calculating your depreciation on your carrying value. So clearly you can see this, accounting learners. Make a note of this, make a mental note of this, that when you're working with the carrying value, it means that you have to do something. Now, what is it that you have to do? This is what you have to do. Take your cost price of 100,000, right? And then take your accumulated depreciation of 10,000, which now gives you something different that you have to calculate. Once again, do not forget art. What is that? Amount, the rate, and the time. Now, watch something different happens now. In this scenario here, when I'm using my diminishing balance method, I do not use the cost price because the question said calculate depreciation at 10% on the diminishing balance method. So the first thing that I do is I have to determine my carrying value. And how will I do that? By taking my cost price, subtracting my accumulated depreciation. Got that? When I do that, I come with an amount of 100,000 minus 10,000, which gives me 90,000. Times the rate, 10%, times the time, 12 over 12. So you can clearly see that something different has happened. What has happened? In this case here, my depreciation amounts to 9,000 Rand. Now remember this, accounting learners, that step number 1, identify which method of depreciation you are expected to use, either the cost price or on the carrying value. Once you have done that, clearly you can see that the direction is now given to you. Okay, so now with the cost price or whether it's diminishing balance method, what is critical is that you have to determine the amount, the rate, and the time. And I'm sure if you use this method, definitely depreciation will be a piece of cake. Stay with us, we'll be back in a jiffy.